Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. Alright, let's talk about one of the most terrifying, mind-bending forces to ever descend upon the galaxy of Warhammer 40k. And I don't say that lightly. In a setting already crawling with chaos gods, planet-breaking wars, and psychic nightmares, the Tyranids still manage to stand out as something different, something worse. Because they're not here to conquer, or enslave, or even to destroy for the sake of destruction. No. They're here for one thing and one thing only, to consume. Everything, every world, every life form, every trace of what once was. There's no bargaining with them, no diplomacy, no weakness to exploit or morality to appeal to. The Tyranids aren't evil in the traditional sense, they're beyond that. They are hunger, given form, a cosmic-level predator that's crossed the void between galaxies with the single-minded goal of feeding. And we're the buffet. You could have the most fortified planet with orbital cannons, space marine chapters, titan legions, and psychers on alert, and none of it might matter. Because once a Hive Fleet sets its sights on you, it's already too late. And what's even more unsettling is that we barely understand them. Imagine that. The Imperium has cataloged horrors for over 10,000 years, yet the Tyranids still remain, in many ways, unknowable. That alone should scare you. Not just what they are, but what we don't know about them. We've only seen the first waves. Hive fleets like Behemoth, Kraken, and Leviathan are terrifying, yes, but what if they're just scouting parties? What if the true mass of the swarm is still on its way, drifting through the endless dark, hungrier than ever? This isn't just another alien species. This isn't just another threat to the Imperium. This is the Great Devourer. The thing that ends civilizations. Not out of hatred, not out of malice, but because that's just what it does. It devours, it evolves, it moves on. And if we don't start understanding what we're dealing with, truly understanding it, then we're not going to have anything left to fight for. So yeah, let's dive into what the Tyranids really are. Their origins, their biology, their tactics, their cults, their myths. Because if we want to survive, or at least tell the story of why we didn't, we'd better start paying attention. It's wild how, after all the horrors the Imperium has faced, from the warp-spawned monstrosities of chaos to the ancient wrath of the Necrons, the Tyranids still manage to be this massive blank spot on the galactic map. Not just in terms of threat, but in terms of sheer mystery. And that's part of what makes them so terrifying. You can fight something if you understand it. You can prepare for it, find its weaknesses, anticipate its moves. But the Tyranids? They didn't just emerge from the shadows of some unknown planet or crawl out of some warp rift like everything else in this cursed galaxy. They came from beyond, from the cold, starless void between galaxies. And that little detail changes everything. We don't even know which galaxy they originally came from. Some fan theories throw out wild suggestions that they may have consumed an entire galaxy already, and were just the next course. Others think they were driven out of their own galaxy by an even more terrifying force, something even they couldn't devour. That one hits differently. The idea that the Great Devourer is, in some twisted way, fleeing from something else. It's horrifying and fascinating all at once. What kind of predator makes them run? Whatever the truth is, it's clear that they didn't evolve naturally in our galactic neighborhood. They're the ultimate outsiders. And they didn't come here by accident. There's a theory floating around in some corners of the fandom that the Tyranids were artificially created. Not by the old ones, of course. They were more into shaping races for psychic potential, but maybe by something even older, or just different. A race that tried to build the perfect weapon, an ecosystem designed not to dominate or enslave, but to consume. Imagine that. A civilization creating an entire species not as soldiers, not as machines, but as a living, evolving, self-sustaining eventuality. And now that civilization's long gone, and their creation is still out there, doing what it was made to do. It would make the Tyranids not just a threat, but a kind of legacy. A galactic grave marker. The Imperium, of course, doesn't have any solid answers. Most of what we know, and that's using the term know generously, comes from scattered encounters and battlefield autopsies. The Magos biologists have been working overtime, but even they admit that much of what the Tyranids are remains speculative. And that's not even getting into the conflicting reports. One Inquisitor swears the Hive Mind displays directed malice, like it's testing us. Another claims it's a blind animal instinct, a cosmic stomach that just swallows whatever it touches. And then there are the rogue scholars who think the Tyranids are psychic weapons, attuned to the warp but existing outside its influence in strange, paradoxical ways. Basically, nobody agrees, which means nobody's figured out how to stop them either. Then you've got the real tinfoil hat stuff, and I mean that in the best way. There's this theory that the Tyranids aren't even a true species in the biological sense, that they're more like an idea that found a way to manifest. Something born in the deepest, most lifeless corners of the universe where entropy itself started to dream. The kind of stuff you'd normally laugh off until you watch a planet get stripped to its mantle in days by creatures that don't sleep, don't fear, and don't stop. And suddenly, the idea of them being some nightmare thought made flesh doesn't feel so far-fetched. The thing is, for all their evolutionary brilliance and overwhelming force, it's that lack of origin, that absence of a story, that's so fundamentally alien. Every other faction in 40k has some kind of narrative. Even the Necrons, who were long thought to be just soulless machines, got a mythos, a tragedy, a reason to exist. The Tyranids, they just arrived. No declaration of war, no motive, just silence. Then hunger. Then extinction. It's like they're not just outside of our galaxy, they're outside of our myth-making. They don't belong in the stories we tell about ourselves. They're the abrupt ending. The blank page where everything else used to be. And the deeper you go into it, the more questions you find. Why are they so perfectly adapted for warfare in this galaxy? How do they know exactly how to dismantle the strengths of every race they encounter? Why does the Hive Mind feel so eerily sentient, like it's not just reacting, but anticipating? It's as if they've done this before. As if we're just another iteration in a process that's already played out countless times. That's the thought that keeps me up at night. Not that they're new and rising, but that they're old. Very, very old. And we're just the latest thing they've decided to wipe off the cosmic slate. If there's one thing that truly sets the Tyranids apart from every other faction in Warhammer 40k, it's their terrifying simplicity. Not in terms of design or tactics, those are insanely complex and adaptive, but in purpose. Everything they do, every bioform they create, every battle they fight, driven by one singular, unrelenting instinct: hunger. Not greed, not conquest, not vengeance, just hunger. Pure, biological necessities scaled to a cosmic level. It's almost poetic in a horrifying way. They don't hate us. They don't even acknowledge us. We're just biomass. And to the Tyranids, biomass is everything. That hunger isn't random. It's not chaotic. It's orchestrated by something far more sinister than just animal instinct. The Hive Mind. That's the real monster here, in my opinion. Not the Carnifexes or the Molochs or even the Hive ships. It's the Hive Mind. This vast, incomprehensible psychic entity that exists across the entire swarm, guiding it with chilling precision. And what's scary is that we don't know what the Hive Mind actually is. It's not just collective thought, it's more than that. It behaves like an intelligence, a will, not sentient in the way we understand it, but purposeful, focused, and utterly alien. Some fans describe the Hive Mind as a god, not in the same sense as the Chaos Pantheon, which is born from emotion and thrives on belief, but as a kind of natural apex. The top of the food chain, not just physically, but metaphysically. There's this theory I love, horrifying but fascinating, that the Hive Mind is what happens when biological evolution reaches critical mass. When enough life is connected and streamlined into a single purpose, it transcends. It stops being many and becomes one. A predator so vast and unified that it can reach across the stars and manipulate trillions of organisms like fingers on a hand. That's what we're dealing with here. Not an army, but an expression of will. And that will, it always hungers. There's no end goal. No final battle, no peace, no negotiation. Just the endless cycle of consumption, assimilation, evolution, and repetition. That's the real horror. Every other race in 40k, for all their madness and brutality, is still driven by something we can sort of understand. The Imperium clings to survival and control. The Eldar fight for the remnants of their doomed legacy. Even the Orcs, as brain-dead as they sometimes seem, are really just living out some chaotic vision of war as life. But the Tyranids, they're post-philosophy, post-ideology. They don't care who you are, what you've built, or what you're fighting for. You are nutrition. That's it. What's even more disturbing is how instinctively perfect they are. There's no hesitation in their behavior, no second guessing. When a Hive fleet sets its sights on a star system, it moves with an eerie inevitability. The advanced scouts, lictors, genestealers, infiltrate and destabilize. Then come the warrior organisms, hormagaunts, termagants, Tyranid warriors, sweeping across the battlefield like a tidal wave. Finally, the massive synapse creatures, Hive tyrants, triguns, carnifexes, lock everything in place, guiding the swarm with perfect coordination. It's like watching nature itself decide to remove a planet. Not out of malice, but because that's just what it does. And speaking of synapse creatures, they're a whole other layer to the Tyranid behavior model. The Hive Mind flows through them, not because they're leaders in the traditional sense, but because they're conduits. Nodal points in a psychic network that spans entire star systems. They allow the will of the Hive Mind to pass through the swarm like electricity through a circuit. Kill them, and the rest of the swarm might fall into disarray for a moment. But even that chaos is short-lived. The swarm doesn't mourn, doesn't panic, it just adapts. New synapse creatures rise, the signal reestablishes, and the hunger continues. I've heard players argue whether Tyranids are truly intelligent or just biologically programmed. Honestly, I think that debate misses the point. Their intelligence isn't like ours. It doesn't express through language or art or memory. It expresses through response, through adaptation, through success. You don't need poetry when you can reshape your entire genetic code to counter a specific threat. You don't need strategy conferences when your every move is guided by a single will that sees and reacts faster than any general ever could. That's a level of behavioral sophistication that makes even the most elite human minds feel sluggish and obsolete. And that brings us to their goals, or rather, the lack of any goal beyond feeding. The Tyranids aren't building an empire. They're not planting flags or converting enemies. They're not even interested in preserving what they consume. They strip it bare, reduce it to base matter, digest, recycle, move on. That's what makes them so fundamentally different from any other Xenos threat. Chaos corrupts, orcs overwhelm, necrons erase. But Tyranids just take. They don't want to rule the galaxy. They want to empty it. And that's what scares me more than anything else. Because you can't negotiate with hunger. You can't plead with instinct. You can't kill the idea of consumption when it's evolved into the perfect machine for doing exactly that. Every action the Tyranids take is just another expression of their one truth. Feed, evolve, survive. Not because they're evil, not because they're cruel, but because that's what they are. One of the most chilling things about the Tyranids isn't just what they are, it's how they arrive. The Hive Fleets. Just saying those words gives me goosebumps. Because these aren't fleets in the way we normally think of them. No orderly rows of ships, no command bridges, no fleets of admirals barking orders. A Tyranid Hive fleet is alive. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. It's a living ecosystem moving through the void, devouring everything in its path, and adapting with every new meal. Picture an entire armada of bioships, some the size of cities, pulsing with alien life and psychic resonance. That's what comes for you when the Hive Mind decides you're next. The scale of it is almost beyond comprehension. When a Hive fleet approaches a star system, the first sign usually isn't ships or scouts. It's silence. A psychic blackout spreads ahead of them like a storm front. Astropaths go mad. Vox channels go dead. The warp becomes unstable and hostile. They call it the shadow in the warp, and it's like the psychic atmosphere of an entire system is being suffocated. No calls for help, no reinforcements, just isolation. That's the first phase of a Tyranid invasion, psychological and psychic disruption, and it works terrifyingly well. Then come the scouts, lictors, genestealers, spores drifting through space and atmosphere. They're not there to fight. Not at first. They're there to map, to analyze, to begin the process of digestion before a single shot is fired. It's horrifyingly surgical. They study a planet's defenses, its terrain, its dominant species, and they feed all of that back to the Hive Mind. And then, once the data is processed, the real horror begins. The main body of the Hive fleet arrives. Massive bioships drift into orbit, their surfaces teeming with pulsating sacs and living cannons. They don't just descend from the sky, they infect it. And from those ships pour the swarm. Mycetic spores rain down like meteorites, each one cracking open to unleash a tide of gaunts, warriors, monstrous beasts, and synapse creatures. They don't attack randomly. They strike weak points. Critical infrastructure, population centers, command posts. And all the while, the ships above begin the process of planetary consumption. They deploy capillary towers, grotesque organic structures that burrow into the crust, sucking up every ounce of biomass they can reach. Not just living matter either, everything. Trees, animals, people, even microbial life. It's all useful to the swarm. Now here's where it gets even worse. Once the swarm has torn through everything on the surface, the bioships start reabsorbing it all. That's right. The Tyranids reclaim their own troops, their own constructs, their own biomass. Every corpse, every spent organism is liquefied and sucked back up to be reconstituted. Nothing is wasted. It's ecological efficiency on a nightmarish scale. And once the process is complete, the Hive Fleet moves on. The planet, now stripped of all life, is left a barren, gray husk. Dead, silent, forgotten. And the crazy part is, this isn't a single monolithic swarm. There are multiple Hive Fleets, each with its own personality, if you can even call it that. Take Behemoth, for example, the first major Hive Fleet to hit the galaxy. It came in hard and fast, slamming into Ultramar like a battering ram. Behemoth was raw aggression, brute force. It wanted to break the Imperium's spine, and it nearly did. The only reason it was stopped was because the Ultramarines pulled off a tactical miracle, and even then the cost was staggering. Then came Kraken. Smarter, meaner. It didn't smash, it struck. Multiple tendrils, lightning raids, guerrilla-style engagements across dozens of worlds. It was like watching a beast learn to hunt more efficiently. Instead of going for the throat, it sliced at arteries, letting the blood drain slow. Kraken adapted faster, flanked harder, and showed that the Tyranids weren't just overwhelming, they were evolving. And then there's Leviathan. Leviathan is the one that makes veterans go quiet in the room. It didn't just attack, it came from below. From the galactic south, something no one expected, and it didn't come in one wave. It came in two, a pincer movement, crushing worlds between its jaws. That was the moment a lot of people realized we weren't dealing with an enemy that was just learning our weaknesses. It was planning around them, coordinating, making moves on a galactic chessboard we hadn't even noticed. But those are just the big names. There are countless splinter fleets, Hydra, Gorgon, Jormungandr, Kronos, each with its own quirks and horrors. Some focus on rapid adaptation, changing their bioforms mid-battle. Others specialize in stealth, burrowing beneath planetary crusts to strike from below. Kronos, in particular, has become infamous for its focus on wiping out chaos. That's right, a hive fleet that seems to be purpose-built for fighting daemons and warp entities. What does that even mean? Did the Hive Mind design Kronos for this? Was it a response to encountering the warp? Or does it know something about chaos that we don't? That's the part that keeps hitting me. The idea that every hive fleet we see might be just one tentacle of something infinitely larger. Each one learning, experimenting, adapting. Like branches from a root system that runs deeper than we can comprehend. And while we're busy surviving one tendril, another is already analyzing our response and planning how to overcome it. The hive mind isn't just throwing numbers at us, it's testing us, probing for weaknesses, rewriting the rules of the invasion each time. So when you hear Hive Fleet, don't think of ships and admirals. Think of a living, thinking, consuming storm, a force of nature wearing the skin of a predator. And realize that when one appears in your star system, the clock isn't ticking down, it already hit zero. There's something deeply unnerving about the Tyranids' approach to war. Not just because of how brutal and overwhelming it is, but because it completely ignores the conventions we've come to expect from intelligent species. They don't build tanks or factories. They don't train soldiers or construct weapons. Instead, they grow everything. Their entire military structure is biological, evolved for maximum efficiency, brutality, and speed. Every organism, from the smallest gaunt to the largest biotitan, is not just a soldier, it's a tool, a living, breathing extension of the hive mind's will. And the most terrifying part? These tools aren't static. They're constantly evolving, constantly adapting. The Tyranids don't improve their weapons through research. They consume, analyze, and mutate. That's how they win. That's how they survive. At the heart of their terrifying adaptability is the concept of the bioform. Each Tyranid organism is a specialized construct, grown to fulfill a very specific role. You've got the cannon fodder, the termagants and hormagaunts, designed to swarm and overwhelm. Then come the synapse creatures like the Tyranid warriors, coordinating the battlefield. Beyond them are the bigger nightmares, carnifexes, trigons, molochs, each a biological monstrosity designed for raw destruction. And then you have the truly alien ones, the zoanthropes and venomthropes, living psychic amplifiers and chemical factories. There's a design to it all, a living balance between speed, strength, control, and mutation. And let's not forget the bio-titans. If you've never seen a Hierophant or a Harridan in action, count yourself lucky. These things are colossal, walking extinction-level events. They don't just fight, they erase. Entire regiments disappear under their claws and biocannons. And the worst part? They're not even rare. The Hive Mind doesn't need to build them in dry docks or send in engineers. It just grows them when it needs them. The moment a planet poses a real challenge, the necessary counter-organisms are created. Grown in fleshy sacks aboard Hive ships, dropped like bombs, and unleashed like nightmares. Then there's the Genestealers, one of the most infamous Tyranid bioforms and honestly, one of the most cunning. These things are apex infiltrators. They don't come charging in like the rest of the swarm. No, they slink into societies years in advance. Hidden, patient, and they start planting seeds, literally and figuratively. The Genestealer cults they create are horrifying in their own right, but we'll get to those later. The point is, the Tyranids don't just attack with brute force. They infect first. They weaken from within. And by the time you realize it's happening, it's too late. Another insane element is how the Tyranids treat battlefield losses. For any other faction, losing troops is a setback. For the Tyranids, it's just more biomass to recycle. Their dead are reabsorbed into the organism, either by feeder tendrils, digestion pools, or simply by other Tyranids carrying them back. Nothing is wasted. A Carnifex goes down? Fine. Its genetic code has already been logged, its experience is analyzed. The next one that gets grown will be better, faster, meaner. That's the loop. Consumption, analysis, evolution. Repeat until there's nothing left. And that loop is endless. There's no final form, no perfect creature, because perfection isn't the goal. Adaptation is. That's what really sinks in when you study these things. They're not striving for supremacy in the way humans or Eldar or even Chaos do. They're striving for response. Every time they fight, they learn. Every time they lose, they grow. You can't even really win against Tyranids in the traditional sense, because every battle, even the ones they lose, gives them more data, more flesh, more information to refine the next wave. A lot of fans like to talk about how this makes them feel more like a force of nature than an army, and I totally agree. Trying to stop a Tyranid swarm is like trying to stop erosion. You might hold the line for a while, maybe even win a battle or two. But the Hive Mind will keep sending waves, and each wave will be better suited to killing you. It's deeply personal in a way that feels completely impersonal. You know what I mean? They don't care who you are, but they will figure out how to destroy you specifically. And then there's the fact that these creatures don't really die in the way we understand it. Sure, their physical forms are destroyed, but the knowledge, the genetic memory of that individual lives on in the Hive Mind. So a Tyranid warrior who gets gunned down by Astra Militarum doesn't just vanish. Its death becomes data, a lesson. And the next warrior born will remember. Not in a conscious way, but in a way that makes it move differently, strike more efficiently, avoid the mistake that killed its predecessor. It's a level of evolutionary intelligence that goes beyond anything we've seen in nature. It's like the Hive Mind is writing code, testing it in the field, then updating the next generation with patch notes. This is why the usual tactics don't work. You can't just build a bigger gun or dig a deeper trench. You have to keep changing. And let's be honest, the Imperium isn't exactly great at changing. It's a lumbering bureaucracy that worships ancient machines and fears innovation. Against Tyranids, that's a death sentence. That's why they've managed to overrun entire sectors despite all the firepower humanity can throw at them. In the end, Tyranid bioforms aren't just weapons, they're messages. Every time the Hive Mind grows something new, it's saying, I saw what you did last time, try it again. And that's what really chills me. Because we're fighting an enemy that doesn't need to understand us to outsmart us, it just needs to digest us. And sooner or later, it always does. You can always tell when the Tyranids are coming. Not because you see them, not even because you hear them, but because everything else goes silent. It's not natural. The warp goes dead, communications go dark, the astropath starts screaming, or worse, they go completely still. That's the shadow in the warp. And in many ways, it's more terrifying than the Tyranids themselves, because it's not something you can fight or shoot or even understand. It's just there, like a storm front of psychic nullification that moves with the swarm, smothering the warp itself in its wake. And when it hits, you're already lost. It's hard to explain just how bad it is unless you've really thought about how dependent the Imperium is on the warp. Not just for travel, though that's huge, but for communication, navigation, psyker activity, even morale. The warp isn't just a tool in Warhammer 40k, it's the nervous system of the entire galaxy. And when the shadow falls, it's like severing that nervous system. Entire sectors go dark. No distress calls, no reinforcement requests, no way to see what's coming. Just a creeping silence that spreads across space like oil. And then, from within that silence, the Hive Fleets arrive. For psychers, it's a death sentence. The moment the shadow sweeps over them, it's like being dropped into a void. Not the cold, starry kind, but the kind where the very fabric of their soul starts unraveling. Some of them go mad. Others burn out, consumed by psychic feedback. A few, and these are the lucky ones, just collapse, comatose, unreachable. I've read accounts from survivors who said it was like being buried alive inside their own mind. No voices, no warp echoes, no Astronomicon. Just a suffocating, choking silence that eats away at your sense of self. And it's not just the sanctioned psychers. The Astartes librarians feel it, the Inquisitors feel it. Even the navigators, those poor souls who rely entirely on the Astronomicon to chart safe passage, they're left blind in the dark. The shadow in the warp makes warp travel all but impossible. Ships either get lost, never to return, or are forced to crawl at sublight speeds, praying they're not spotted by the swarm. It turns entire war zones into psychic blackouts. And when help doesn't come, not because it wasn't sent, but because it couldn't hear you, that's when panic sets in. But here's the real kicker. The shadow isn't just a byproduct of the Tyranids. It's a weapon. It's something the Hive Mind does on purpose. That level of intent is what gets under my skin. This isn't just a side effect of a giant psychic presence rolling in. It's strategic. It isolates, demoralizes, and cripples the enemy before a single drop of biomass is consumed. The Hive Mind doesn't want to fight fair. It wants to win before the shooting starts. And honestly, that's way scarier than any biological monstrosity they can grow. There's this idea floating around among some fans that the shadow isn't just nullification, that it's a kind of psychic predation, that it doesn't block the warp so much as feed on it, like a siphon, draining the emotional and psychic energy of the living to fuel itself. That's a chilling thought. Imagine not just being cut off from the warp, but having your soul slowly consumed by the presence of something so vast and alien that it doesn't even recognize you as conscious. Just another spark of energy to be harvested. And when you combine that with the psychic might of the Tyranid specialist bioforms, zoanthropes, neurothropes, maliceptors, it becomes even worse. These things don't just emit psychic force, they amplify the Hive Mind's presence. It's like plugging a thunderstorm into a loudspeaker. Entire battlefields are drowned in the signal, and the human mind just isn't built to handle that kind of pressure. It's not just confusion, it's neurological shutdown. Troops lose cohesion. Orders stop making sense, and commanders, no matter how disciplined, start breaking down. There's one account that always sticks with me, from a guardsman on Khalistan who fought during the early stages of Leviathan's approach. He described a moment when the warp just stopped. No voices, no static, no dreams, just silence. The local astropath gouged out her own eyes, even though she didn't need them to see. And the soldiers? They stopped sleeping. Not because they were afraid, but because they couldn't dream anymore. That's what the shadow in the warp does. It doesn't just kill communication, it kills hope. And yet, for all the devastation it causes, we still don't fully understand how the Hive Mind creates it. Is it simply the scale of its psychic presence? Or is it something more refined? something designed? The fact that it can be modulated, stronger in some regions, weaker in others, suggests control. Precision, and that terrifies me more than anything. Because it means the hive mind knows exactly how we operate. It knows what to target, and it knows how to shut us down before we ever see the first spore drop. Even chaos, for all its madness, exists in the same psychic playground as the rest of the galaxy. The Tyranids are different. They invade that space, corrupt it in a completely alien way. It makes you wonder, what happens if they reach Terra? If the Astronomicon itself falls under the shadow? Would the Imperium even survive a week? It's not just about armies and fleets anymore. It's about psychic infrastructure, and the Tyranids are already tearing it down, piece by piece. Some believe this is why the hive mind hasn't fully entered the warp, that it's testing the edges, searching for a way to unravel even the immaterium. Others think the Tyranids are evolving psychic weapons specifically for this purpose. It wouldn't surprise me. Everything they do feels like a test, a probing move before the next big strike. And the shadow is the opening act, a whisper of extinction that precedes the roar. Watching the Tyranids consume a world is like witnessing a slow, methodical apocalypse, one that's been rehearsed 1,000,000 times before. It doesn't happen in a single dramatic strike or cataclysmic event. No, the Tyranids don't burn worlds or glass them from orbit like some races do. What they do is worse. They strip them, bit by bit, layer by layer, until nothing remains but lifeless dust. It's clinical, efficient, and absolutely terrifying in its precision. When the invasion begins, most people still think they can fight it off. They see the swarms and the monsters and think it's just another war, another threat to repel. But what they don't realize is that the battle is already over the moment the hive mind turns its attention their way. What follows isn't warfare in the traditional sense, it's harvest. The first wave of Tyranid organisms are rarely the most dangerous, they're the most necessary. They're there to secure biomass, to kill, to break resistance, not because the Tyranids care about victory, but because dead things are easier to digest. Once the defenders are overwhelmed or isolated, the real process begins. The surface of the planet transforms into a grotesque alien ecosystem. Capillary towers sprout from the ground like tumors, connecting to the larger hive ships in orbit. These organic towers are horrifying to see, pulsing, twisting things that drill into the crust and start extracting everything. Water, plant life, animal life, human remains, microorganisms, even minerals. Everything is liquefied, broken down into base components, and sucked skyward into the waiting maws of the bioships above. This part of the process is disturbingly quiet. Most of the defenders are already dead by now, or in hiding, or trying desperately to flee. The skies are dark with spores and ash, and the planet begins to rot. The atmosphere thickens with toxins that further break down what's left. Even the very air becomes unbreathable, corrupted by the Tyranids' biological mechanisms. They don't just conquer ecosystems, they unmake them. Everything is reduced to its most usable molecular form and then recycled into new Tyranids. A person becomes acid, becomes nutrients, becomes a new warrior. A forest becomes a swarm. A sea becomes a digestive pool. People often ask, can you escape a world being consumed? And the answer, honestly, is almost never. By the time the invasion is fully underway, most means of escape are gone. The shadow in the warp blocks long-range communication. Warp travel becomes dangerous, if not impossible. Airspace is dominated by Tyranid biofighters, and landing zones are saturated with spores and living minefields. The hive mind wants you trapped. Every moment you spend trying to evacuate is another moment it learns more about you, adjusts its strategies, and sends more specialized organisms to stop you. And even if you do make it off-world, you're not in the clear. The Hive Fleets are massive and patient. They've been known to pursue fleeing ships, track them through the warp, or worse, infect them with Genestealers before they ever leave. You don't just run from the Tyranids, you drag them with you. That's how they spread. That's how more worlds fall. One infected freighter, one hidden cultist, and the process starts all over again somewhere else. There's also this horrifying realization that hits you the more you study their invasion pattern. There's no waste. Every part of the world serves a function. Even destruction has purpose. Entire mountain ranges are collapsed to access hidden minerals. Oceans are evaporated to harvest marine life. Cities are crushed not out of spite, but because their infrastructure interferes with the flow of biomass. It's not destruction for destruction's sake, it's calculated removal. A planet doesn't die screaming, it dies efficiently, and afterward, there's nothing left. No ruins, no remnants, not even corpses, just a dead husk. A gray, cracked shell drifting in space. The atmosphere is gone, the oceans are gone, the crust is mined out. It's as if the world was never alive to begin with. And that's what separates Tyranids from almost every other force in the galaxy. Orcs leave behind spores. Chaos leaves behind corruption. Even Necrons leave monuments to their own arrogance. But Tyranids erase, utterly and completely. They leave nothing behind. No history, no legacy, no trace. That's not just terrifying, it's insulting in a way. Like the world never mattered. Some fans like to debate whether the Tyranids are even aware of what they're doing. Are they acting with intention? Is this cold logic or blind instinct? Personally, I think it doesn't matter. Whether they know what they're erasing or not, the result is the same. Entire civilizations gone. Cultures that took millennia to build, devoured in weeks. And for what? Fuel. Building blocks for the next wave. And let's not forget the psychological effect this has on those fighting them. Imagine watching your planet being digested while you hide in some deep bunker, knowing there's no rescue coming, knowing you're just a delay, a bump in the process. The kind of dread that must inspire. It's not the panic of battle, but the hopelessness of witnessing inevitability. That kind of horror breaks people in ways that normal war never could. That's the true strategy of the Tyranids. Not just to kill, but to unmake, to destroy the idea of resistance, to erase any hope of legacy or survival. It's not just a war, it's extinction by design. And the worst part, they're so good at it. If there's one thing the Tyranids have managed to do beyond eating worlds and shutting down the warp, it's uniting an entire galaxy in terror. Everyone hates them, everyone fears them. And not because of ideology or politics or ancient grudges. No, the hatred is primal, existential. It's survival instinct kicking in when you realize there's something out there that doesn't want to conquer or negotiate. It just wants to devour. And that makes the reactions of the other races in the galaxy fascinating to look at, because every single one of them, no matter how powerful or advanced, has been forced to reckon with the same unstoppable wall of hunger. The Imperium, of course, was one of the first to feel the full weight of a major Hive fleet. Behemoth's attack on Ultramar was a wake-up call nobody saw coming. And while the Ultramarines managed to hold the line, barely, it changed everything. Since then, the Imperium's response has ranged from brute force to outright desperation. Entire sectors have been fortified, exterminatus protocols enacted preemptively, and entire armies mobilized just to buy a few more weeks. But here's the thing, the Imperium doesn't adapt easily. It's a relic machine, more concerned with dogma than innovation. And the Tyranids exploit that. Every time the Imperium repeats a tactic, the swarm comes back stronger, faster, more efficient. It's like playing chess against an opponent who remembers every move you've ever made and rewrites the rules each time. What's worse is how stretched thin humanity is. The Imperium has enemies on all sides, internal rebellions, and a deteriorating infrastructure. Fighting Tyranids on top of everything else is like trying to hold back a flood with a rusted colander. Some Inquisitors have proposed creating bioweapons or psyker-driven countermeasures, but those come with their own horrors and risks. And in the end, most responses still boil down to throw bodies at it and pray. Sometimes it works. More often, it just slows the inevitable. Now, when it comes to the Eldar, their perspective is more tragic in a way. They see the Tyranids not just as a threat, but as the end of everything. And for a race already teetering on the edge of extinction, that's especially bleak. The Eldar don't have the numbers for prolonged war. They rely on precision strikes, webway escapes, and psychic foresight to survive. But none of that works reliably against the Hive Mind. Their seers struggle to predict Tyranid movements. The shadow in the warp clouds their visions, and when they do try to intervene, it's often surgical. Hit-and-run raids, sabotage, delaying actions. It's effective in small doses, but it's not sustainable. Some craft worlds have chosen to avoid Tyranid-infected zones entirely. Others have perished trying to stop them. There's also a haunting theory whispered among some Eldar mystics. that the Tyranids are part of some final cosmic balance, a correction, even a punishment for the decadence of the past. Not everyone buys it, but in the face of something so utterly unstoppable, you start looking for meaning wherever you can. The orcs, though, man, the orcs are different. In a way, they're the only race that seems to genuinely enjoy fighting the Tyranids. Because to the orcs, a Tyranid invasion isn't a crisis. It's a party. Endless waves of enemies, no need to retreat, giant monsters to fight. That's peak entertainment for an orc. There have been entire warbands that have followed Hive Fleets just to keep the fight going. But it's not all fun and games. When the Tyranids adapt, they start producing bioforms specifically tailored to counter orc physiology and tactics. That's when the laughter stops. And while orcs can swarm just as hard as the Tyranids, they don't recycle losses the same way. They eventually burn out, splinter, or get overrun. Still, there's an ongoing fan debate. If any race could truly match the Tyranids in raw adaptability and numbers, it might actually be the orcs. In some scenarios, when warbands get big enough and wag, energy starts messing with reality, they've even turned the tide. But it's rare, and even then, it doesn't stop the swarm, it just delays the feast. The Tau, on the other hand, are in a rough spot. They rely heavily on advanced technology, drones, and coordinated tactics. But Tyranids don't play by the rules of conventional warfare. They disrupt, overwhelm, and corrupt. And while the Tau have managed some impressive victories, especially using firepower and mobility, they lack psychic strength. That makes them especially vulnerable to the shadow and the warp. No astropaths, no warp-powered countermeasures. Just cold metal and clean algorithms trying to outthink a galaxy-spanning superorganism. It's admirable, and horrifyingly insufficient. Some fan circles even speculate that if the Tau ever face a full-scale Hive fleet without help, they won't survive it. Not because they're weak, but because they've never fought something that learns this fast. Then there are the Necrons. Now they are a weird case. The Necrons don't fear death, they don't feel pain, they don't even have biomass. In theory, they should be immune to Tyranid consumption, and for the most part, they are. But that doesn't mean they're safe. Some tomb worlds have been overrun, not for food, but for strategic positioning. Others have awakened just in time to repel a swarm. And here's the kicker. The Necrons hate the Tyranids, not because they pose a direct threat, but because they represent chaos. Not chaos with a capital C, but the kind of unclean, organic entropy the Necrons despise. They see the swarm as a contamination that needs to be purged. There are even theories that some Necron dynasties are trying to manipulate the Hive Mind itself, or find a way to block or disrupt it. It's ambitious and kind of terrifying, because if anyone could actually hack the Tyranids, it might be the Necrons. Whether that would be good or bad for the galaxy is up for debate. And let's not forget the Chaos factions. On paper, you'd think the Great Devourer would be their worst nightmare. But it's more complicated than that. Tyranids don't feed the warp the same way mortals do. They don't worship, fear, or feel in ways the gods can exploit. Some even believe the Hive Mind dulls warp energy, starving daemons of emotional sustenance. That's probably why Hive Fleet Chronos seems so obsessed with purging chaos infestations. It's like the Hive Mind recognizes the warp as a rival ecosystem and wants it gone. In the end, every race reacts differently, but the theme is always the same: desperation. The Tyranids don't offer war, they offer termination, and everyone's just trying to survive. If the Hive Fleets are the storm, then the Genestealer Cults are the slow rot that weakens the walls before it ever hits. They're the whispered madness behind closed doors, the prayers mumbled in underground chambers, the flickering symbol painted on a worker's tool belt. And the worst part? You usually don't even know they're there until it's way, way too late. That's what makes them so chilling. The Tyranids can destroy a world in weeks, but the cults can hollow one out from the inside over decades, and no one notices. It always starts with a single Genestealer. Just one. Slips through the cracks, maybe from a crashed ship, maybe from a hidden spore pod that landed in some forgotten mining outpost. It finds a host, usually a human, but honestly, it can be anything vaguely compatible. And then it implants a seed, a genetic corruption. But it's not like a parasite in the traditional sense. It's intimate, twistedly beautiful, even. The host doesn't feel violated, they feel chosen, enlightened, loved. That's the most disturbing part. The infection isn't just biological, it's emotional. The victim begins to worship the Genestealer as a god, and the offspring they produce isn't seen as an abomination. It's a blessing, a holy child. And from there, it spreads. The next generation carries more of the Tyranid gene, but they're still capable of passing for human, especially in the chaos of frontier life. Over time, they become part of the community. They work in the factories, drive the transports, serve in the PDF. They climb social ranks, gather influence. The cult doesn't grow like a military force, it grows like a family. Slowly, carefully, with love. And that's what makes it so insidious, because these people don't see themselves as traitors, they see themselves as liberators. I've read first-hand reports from Imperial agents embedded in cults, and the thing that always comes up is how normal they seem at first. Sure, there's a weird vibe, maybe they all go to the same meetings, maybe there's a strange symbol scratched into the wall near the HAB unit, but nothing overt, nothing actionable. And by the time you do figure it out, they've already infiltrated law enforcement, the military, the supply chains. Try to root them out, and the whole system breaks down. That's not just good strategy, that's terrifying design. The Genestealer cults don't just worship the Tyranids, they prepare for them. That's their endgame, they call it the Day of Ascension. It's this moment of ecstatic martyrdom when the Hive Fleet finally arrives and the cult reveals itself in full. They rise up, overthrow the local government, open the gates, disable the defenses, and then they welcome the swarm. They don't run. They don't fight, they celebrate. Because to them, being consumed by the Tyranids is salvation. The final communion. The great joining. There's this really disturbing theory some fans have. What if the Hive Mind lets the cults believe they matter? That all this devotion and loyalty is just another manipulation? That the Hive Mind doesn't care about them at all? It just uses their labor, their sabotage, their flesh, and then erases them like everyone else? I mean, there's no special reward for cultists, no protection. They get devoured just like the rest, but they go willingly. That's the part that haunts me. It's not fear that drives them, it's love. Twisted, blind, all-consuming love. Some planets never even realize they're infected until the uprising begins, and by then it's not just civilians with farming tools, it's military officers, defense cogitators, planetary governors. Entire chains of command collapse overnight, and that's when the Hive Fleet descends. Not into a battlefield, but into an open mouth. No orbital resistance, no fleet engagement, just a warm welcome and a feast waiting below. It's almost poetic, in the most horrific way possible. And even when the cults fail, when the Imperium manages to root them out in time, or when they rise up too early, it still leaves damage. Civil wars, broken infrastructure, distrust in institutions, entire planets destabilized. And the Hive Mind doesn't need every cult to succeed. It just needs enough. That's the brilliance of it. It's not one massive plan, it's 1,000 little gambits, all playing out simultaneously across the galaxy. There's also this growing concern that the cults are evolving. Some fan circles talk about newer strains, more subtle infections, even psychic elements being introduced to avoid detection. And there are stories, rumors really, that some Genestealer patriarchs have started operating independently. Not rogue necessarily, but distant, almost as if they're becoming mini hive minds in their own right. It's probably nonsense. But with Tyranids, nonsense has a nasty habit of turning out to be true. And then there's the symbolism, the cult iconography. Those 8-pointed stars that aren't quite chaos, those triple arms reaching skyward, those underground sermons whispered in guttural, inhuman tones. There's something ancient about it. Like the cults aren't just a recent evolution, but a reawakening of something that's always been beneath the surface. A primal memory, a biological inevitability. That's what scares me most. Not the monsters, not the ships, not the swarms. It's the neighbor who smiles at you a little too warmly. The coworker who's always last to leave the factory. The preacher with strange eyes and a voice that makes your bones ache, because by the time you realize what they are, the song is already being sung. And the Great Devourer is already on its way. The big question, the one that always hangs over every conversation about the Tyranids, is simple and brutal. Can they be stopped? And honestly, if you've made it this far into studying them, into understanding how they move, how they think, how they consume, it's hard not to feel a little hopeless. They don't negotiate. They don't stop. They don't even want anything beyond the next biomass-rich target. It's like trying to stop a fundamental law of nature. You don't fight gravity, you fall. And in the minds of a lot of fans, the Tyranids represent that exact kind of inevitability. The final enemy, the endgame. But still, there are theories. There's always that stubborn spark of hope, even in the darkness of the 41st millennium. Some cling to the idea that the Tyranids can be outmaneuvered, that the Hive Fleets are vast, yes, but not infinite. If you hit them hard enough, disrupt the synapse structure, starve them of biomass, maybe you can force them into hibernation. It's happened before. Hive Fleet Behemoth was shattered at Macragge. Kraken was torn apart by a series of surgical strikes. Leviathan was cut into pieces and stalled, at least temporarily. But the question is whether those were victories or just pauses in the feeding cycle. There's a popular fan theory that what we're seeing in the galaxy right now is just the tip of the spear. The leading edge, the scouting arms of something much, much bigger. That the real mass of the Hive Mind is still in the void between galaxies, just waiting for a signal. And every Hive Fleet that reaches us isn't just here to consume, it's here to test, to learn. If that theory is true, then every victory we've had so far hasn't weakened the Tyranids. It's educated them. They're studying our strengths, our weaknesses, our response patterns. And one day, when they've gathered enough data, they'll descend in full. Not a Hive Fleet, an ocean. Some believe there might be a more metaphysical countermeasure, that maybe the old ones, or whatever came before, left something behind. A weapon, a force, an idea. The Tyranids are so far outside the usual threats that they almost require a mythic solution. Maybe it's the awakening of the Necron pylons, which once stabilized the warp and might be able to disrupt the Hive Mind's link. Maybe it's something hidden deep in the webway, something even the Eldar forgot. A psychic firewall or a reality anchor or some forgotten Xenos technology buried beneath 1,000 dead worlds. The galaxy is big. The past is deep. Maybe something's still out there, waiting to be found. Others put their faith in chaos. Ironically enough, the idea is that the Hive Mind is a massive psychic entity, but it doesn't work like the warp. It doesn't feel emotion, it doesn't create gods. But what if the Hive Mind gets too big? What if, by sheer mass, it starts warping the warp itself? Could it draw the attention of the Chaos Gods? Could it be corrupted? Could it create its own god? That idea terrifies me more than anything, because a Tyranid Chaos God isn't something anyone could control. It wouldn't be lust or rage or deceit. It would be hunger incarnate, amplified to infinite scale. But it could also be their undoing. Maybe Chaos will see them as a rival and start pushing back. Not to save us, of course, just out of spite. There's another angle that doesn't get talked about enough, and that's the idea of containment. Not victory, not annihilation, just control. If the galaxy can't destroy the Tyranids, maybe it can fence them in. Push them into dead sectors, starve them of biomass, set traps and barriers. Maybe the Imperium, the Tau, the Eldar, even the Necrons can work together, not as allies but as adjacent survivors with a shared enemy. It's a grim vision, but one with precedent. Entire sectors have been sacrificed before to buy time. Whole systems declared lost causes to draw Hive Fleets away from more valuable targets. It's horrible. But in the grimdark future, horrible is pretty much standard operating procedure. And yet, there's also a growing fear among some that the galaxy won't be able to unite in time. That all these little wars, Chaos Crusades, Orc incursions, Tau expansions, Necron awakenings, they're distractions. While we fight over borders and relics and grudges, the Hive Mind is watching, waiting. Every delay, every conflict is another opportunity for the Tyranids to grow stronger, to adapt, and when they finally strike for real, when the true wave comes, we'll be too fractured to stop it. A lot of fans theorize that the final fate of the galaxy might not be chaos or the Emperor's death or some warp implosion, but the Tyranids simply finishing the meal. That one day, the last light will go out, the last soul will be consumed, and the Hive Mind will look back across a dead galaxy and feel nothing at all. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just the silence that comes after a hunger is sated. It's haunting. But it's also fitting, in a way. But here's what gives me hope, even if it's small. The Tyranids are perfect predators, but they're still part of the ecosystem now. And ecosystems are messy. unpredictable, full of unexpected mutations and last-minute miracles. Maybe something will change. Maybe some rogue psyker, some forgotten planet, some misunderstood relic will tip the scales. Because if there's one thing we know about the galaxy, it's that it refuses to die quietly. And as long as there are stories being told, legends of resistance, of heroism, of last stands, then maybe, just maybe, the Great Devourer doesn't get the last word. After everything we've gone through, the horror, the hunger, the strategy, the sheer, overwhelming alien logic of it all, it becomes clear why the Tyranids are one of the most terrifying factions in Warhammer 40k. They aren't just monsters. They're not demons, not conquerors, not even villains in the traditional sense. They are the answer to a question the galaxy didn't want to ask. What if evolution had no soul? What if the end of all things wasn't fire or madness or divine punishment, but simply consumption? Quiet, endless, efficient consumption. The Tyranids don't hate us. They don't care about our gods or our wars or our histories. They're not here to punish us. They're here because we're made of calories. And that makes them scarier than any other threat out there, because they are the perfect reflection of cold, indifferent nature at its most advanced. A species without ego, without culture, without fear. Just hunger. Pure, distilled hunger stretched across stars and given claws. And yet, in the face of that, the galaxy fights. Humans dig trenches and man the walls. Eldar whisper through the webway, still trying to outplay extinction. Tau brace behind railguns, and orcs charge headlong into the maw with glee. Even the Necrons rise from their tombs to push back the tide. Maybe that's the real story here. Not that the Tyranids will devour us, but that we won't go quietly. So if you've made it this far, ask yourself, is the Great Devourer truly unstoppable, or will the galaxy find a way to resist? Maybe we don't know the ending yet. Maybe we never will. But we do know the stakes, and that alone is reason enough to keep fighting. If you found this dive into the Tyranids fascinating or terrifying, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more Warhammer lore, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. What's your favorite Hive fleet? Do you think there's hope for the galaxy? Or is it already too late? Let's talk about it. Thanks for watching, and remember, the Swarm is always watching too.